Well, I'm here this afternoon at Cave B Winery with Freddy Arredondo, and he's been gracious enough to give me some of his time. And so first of all, I just want to say thank you for letting me be here and for taking some time to talk to me. The first question that I have for Freddy is, have you always been a TV personality, or is this a new gig for you? I've noticed the Fun Fridays with Freddy virtual wine tasting and cooking demo. Yeah.
I'm very far from a TV personality for sure, but I've done a few interviews on camera, and I enjoy them. It's fun. And as far as doing the Fun Fridays thing, that was my wife's brainchild, and she does all of our social media marketing and events and branding here at the winery, and so she had this great idea to do this virtual wine. A lot of places are doing virtual wine tasting, and she's like, well, you've got kind of something different that you can add to that a lot of winemakers may not necessarily. So she said, why don't we do a cooking demo and a wine tasting? Like, sure, let's do it. And so we've been doing it. This Friday will be our 8th week. We set up a 12-week series, so we're actually gonna take a week off next week, but it's been every Friday, and then we'll go through June. And then maybe we'll start up again, after the fall. But it's been fun.
It's a kick. You can read about it on the website. By the way, the new labels for your wines are fantastic. There's a lot of really cool information on the website for KB Winery, so you should take a look at it. But that brings me to another question, which is, tell us a little bit about your journey from being a chef in California to being a winemaker in the Columbia Basin.
Sure. Yeah. So as far as the chef portion, I started cooking at the age of 13. My parents had a small Mexican food takeout restaurant in Southern California. So I started cooking there, like I said, at 13 years old. I was in 8th grade, cooked there, all through high school, and then a couple of years out of high school. And while working there, I decided I wanted to go to culinary school. So went to culinary school in Scottsdale, Arizona. After finishing culinary school, I was there for a couple of years. And then once I finished culinary school, worked in Las Vegas and then in Hawaii on a cruise ship, and then moved to Los Angeles and worked in LA for a while. And then while I was in LA, I decided I wanted to go to Europe and kind of further my culinary experience / education in Europe. So I did a 6-month professional culinary program in Italy that's designed specifically for foreigners in the northern part of Italy to basically show them authentic Northern Italian cuisine and have them take it back to whatever country they're from and cook as the Northern Italians would say, the only authentic Italian food to cook. So
sure, yeah.
So then did that and moved back to California, and then at that point I actually taught a high school program. I developed a vocational education program for restaurant occupations. Did that for 4 years. 2 years into that program, my Carrie and I got married, so we lived in California for a couple of years, and then moved together for a couple of years. I was there, not married for 2 years first, and then moved to Seattle, and I was working in Seattle in corporate food service, and we would come out to Cave B. Before it was Cave B, it was just the farm. So we'd come out here and spend time and just relax, get some sunshine. And on one of the trips back throughout this time, after leaving Italy, my interest in wine really started to develop, and I was not picking up the food publications as much and picking up the wine publications more.
Interesting.
And just kind of learning more and developing this love for wine that I didn't have before. And one time on the way driving back home to Seattle, I just looked at Carrie, and it was raining cats and dogs on the drive. And I said, you know what, I think I want to change careers, and I think I want to go to school to learn how to make wine. So she's like, well, let's do it. So we sold our house in Seattle, moved to Walla Walla, did the 2-year enology and viticulture program in Walla Walla, and then started working at Cave B, because Cave B opened right around the time, actually just before I started going to the wine program. The idea of Cave B was sprouted, and then it opened, and I had a place to land once I was done with school.
So here you are.
So here I am.
Yeah. Well, this week in our Lessons from the Outside, we're talking about trellis or rule of life, and the Greek word for rule is translated trellis, or the Greek word for trellis is translated rule. And so I wanted to talk with Freddy just a little bit about trellising, and I noticed the grapes that we see around here are grown on trellises, so maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the trellis system.
Yeah, so the trellis system is there to actually give the grapes support, and without these trellis wires, these vines would just kind of grow out in kind of a wily mess, and they wouldn't have anything to hold on to. So as the vine shoots up, as these shoots start growing up, you have these little things that come off of it. These are called tendrils, and these when the wind starts moving them against the wire, they'll actually find themselves they'll attach themselves to the wire and start curling around it to get support. And that's what gives the vine that support. And once it's fixed on that position, that vine will no longer grow up from that point. It grows from the apical point, from the top point. So once this vine attaches, that part of the vine is stationary, and it just begins to grow this way. So it's kind of a way for the grapes just to have a support as they're growing up, and then once the fruit starts to ripen, it gives that vine weight, and then if that vine is supported up top, it can hold up, and it doesn't fall to the ground, which it would do without the support of the trellis.
Yeah, it was interesting to me when Freddy was talking about tendrils, and I made the connection that the restaurant out here at KB is called Tendrils. I never really made the connection where that came from, but you mentioned that not all grapes grow on trellises. Can you talk a little bit about the ones that don't?
Yeah, some of the grapes that don't grow on trellises, they're called head trained or goblet trained, and so what we have is a cordon, a dual cordon. So the trunk comes up, and then you have a cordon comes this way and a cordon goes that way, and then all of the vines shoot up from there. With a goblet or a head trained vine, the trunk comes up, and then off of that you have multiple cordons that are shorter, and then it forms like a goblet around the trunk. For those types of systems, there is typically just one center spike that gives rigidity to that trunk to give that support until that trunk is big enough and girthy enough to hold the weight on its own. Those types of plantings are typically planted independently, so you actually farm around the vine rather than in rows like we do here. It's still rows to a degree, but they're very different type of farming than this here, and they're typically dry farm too. They're not irrigated. So here, the trellis, all of the support system allows us to attach a drip wire and drip line to be able to water the vines. And typically in head trained or goblet trained vines, they're typically dry farmed.
And I find that fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about, I would not have thought you would dry farm grapes anywhere, but that's my ignorance of the topic.
Yeah, in many parts of the world, they are not only dry farmed, in a lot of places of the world, they're actually not allowed to irrigate. So,
really?
Obviously not true in the United States. There are some places in Washington State that do dry farm. In the Walla Walla area, if you go towards the Blue Mountains, there are a couple of vineyards there that dry farm. There are a couple of other spots, obviously on the west side, they grow some hybrids and they're dry farmed. But it's pretty wet over there, so I don't know how dry the dry farming is. But anyway, it's just dry farming just means that you're not irrigating yourself. You're just relying on Mother Nature, and to provide the water.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The other thing that I was wondering about as far as that's going is how early in the process of growing the grapes do you put them on to these trellises?
From the very beginning.
Really?
Yeah. So the moment that the grapes are planted, typically in that first year, you have your stakes in, and then what we call the cordon wire, and that allows it to have, because you have to attach these little bamboo sticks. You need something to attach those to, so at the top to give it some rigidity. Otherwise, that vine will go up and then it'll just flop sideways. So it's got to have something to hang on to. So really, in the first year, you've already got that first wire. We can add the top wires later on, but then typically in the second year, once you're grown to the wire, then you start establishing your arms or your cordons. So it's at the very beginning.
That's really interesting. Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about is whether I'm imagining it or Because it appears to me that if you look around the Columbia Basin, we see more and more fruit being grown on trellises. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and typically what's happening there is grapes have kind of always been grown on trellises, and actually a lot of fruit has always been grown on trellises. But what's happening is that the trellising systems are getting more and more involved because our farming practices have changed and they've evolved over the years, and we've gone to smaller plants, higher density, so it's more fruit on fewer plants, or smaller plants, if you will. And so those plants, they're not these big, hurricane things that can actually support the weight of the fruit. So by putting them on these complex trellising systems, you have support to hold up the weight of that fruit as it ripens and it matures.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and to think about how early you start with the trellising and how it helps to do less about growing the big root and more about the fruit and the,
right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talk a little bit about the pruning process and how much time that takes. When do you start that? What does that look like?
So for the pruning process, we do what's called the 2-bud spur prune. And all of these shoots right here, so you can see this shoot right here that's growing out, we would prune this back. So this is this year's growth. Last year, we pruned it right here. This is last year's growth. So last year's growth, we pruned it back to 2 buds. Each one of those buds gave us 1 shoot. Okay, so that's our 2-bud spur prune. So once and that takes place, typically we start around January, sometimes December, depends on what nature is doing for us.
Yeah.
But if we can start in December, we do. But typically we start not December, I apologize. We typically start end of January and into February. What we really want to do is we want to wait for all of the extreme cold to have passed.
Okay.
And the reason for that is if we have any type of bud damage, if we have extreme weather events, we can monitor how much was impacted on the fruit and how much to leave. So if in a year, if we had a lot of really harsh freezes, we would leave more buds to account for some of the buds not making it through the winter. That hasn't happened in a while, to be honest. So we've actually been pretty good these last few years. But yeah, that's and we just monitor and check the buds to make sure that they're sound. And what you can do is you actually just you literally just take a razor blade and cut into the bud, and you can see the primary bud. Each bud has 3 buds in it.
Yeah.
There's a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. So the primary will give you typically 2 clusters of fruit. And that's the one that goes off first. If the primary, but that's also the most sensitive bud to freeze.
Yeah.
If that one freezes, then you have the secondary, and typically the secondary bud has 1 bunch of fruit, and it's a smaller bud.
Okay.
So that one will go. And if both the primary and the secondary are damaged, you will get another shoot from the tertiary bud. It's typically a smaller shoot and it doesn't have fruit. But what it does is it maintains that spur position to give you growth for the plant to be able to photosynthesize and stay healthy.
That sounds like a really involved process. How many people would you have doing that work here at one time?
Typically our pruning crew is about 12 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so maybe the last question, I'm just curious how this shutdown has impacted your industry.
It's been interesting. Luckily, again, I'm gonna give a shout out to my wife. She's been super creative in coming up with ways like the Fun Fridays with Freddy, to engage our customers and our guests, to give them some kind of an experience, even though they can't come in and taste. But just to do different things and offer different programs, and we've been having to do some obviously sales and things like that, and sell wine for prices that we normally wouldn't sell it for,
right?
To entice people to keep buying.
Exactly.
It has its challenges for sure.
I'm sure.
But overall, we're still very blessed. So in the grand scheme of effects and people that are affected, we're very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It's great to hear that, and I just want to say thanks to Freddy for letting me come out and giving me some of his time and just learning about this. This is a fascinating thing. The Columbia Basin is filled with amazing stuff, and there are wineries all over the place. And sometimes, we just don't even get out and see what's right in our neighborhood. So thanks for letting me come out. Thanks for educating me about this, and
you're welcome.
I'm really grateful.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, thank you. And normally it feels really awkward to not give this man a handshake, and I'm a hugger, and give him a hug actually. But the times that we're in.
And if you go to Moses Lake Christian Church routinely, you'll know how funny it is that, and how grateful I am that it's a time when he can't hug me. So no, but we joke about me not being a hugger, but I love that. So yeah, we've had to keep our distance. Hopefully you can hear this okay. But anyway, thanks again.
Thank you.